Way, Andrew.
That's right. 1 second. Is the laser pointer going to work? Is the next question. Okay, there we go. I mean, so I've walked around far too much, hence why I don't like getting stuck by a keyboard, and those lights are really bright. That's going to get confusing. Why are we here? As already been mentioned, we're here for Deception Technology, and it's a 101 conversation. The purpose of this talk was not everybody's come across Deception Technology in a way we can implement it in a business case. And I'll discuss some of that, some of the reasons why I think you might want to, and some of the reasons why typically you don't get to do it in business because we don't always get to play with the fun stuff, even if it is one of our favourite technologies. And I'll touch on slightly a bit of infrastructure as code in the hope of it might provide one way that we can do more of this stuff to help defend against our adversaries. And I'll try and combine the two. Warning, despite the pun, there might not actually be any profit at the end of it, unless you like listening to me talk, in which case I'll keep going forever. Lord Dave likes pulling people off stage, so I'll try my very best to do it. Another disclaimer, both of these topics are 101. I'm not going to be dropping any elite level knowledge. We're not going to change your life too much with this unless you find you really, really like it. But hopefully we'll just spark some ideas that you can take away, play with, and just get hands-on with some of this technology some more. So that's the contents of the talk. Who am I? I'm not just the idiot that stood on stage. My name is Andrew. Currently in my day job I work as a cloud security engineer, and if you want to hear more about this, I spend far too much of my life on Twitter talking about all of this stuff as well, to the point where there's somebody in the audience has already decided whether or not they can turn a drinking game to see if they can get drunk by the number of times I say the word honeypot on a presentation. I think possibly that's a good way to end up catatonic and in the back of an ambulance, so I definitely would not recommend that one. So I shall do my best. But before I do any of that, I want to take advantage of standing on a stage at B-Sides Newcastle to address an apology and a point of guilt I've had. Does anybody remember this? Was anybody here for our first one? There's some hands up. I've got to say, as a northern gent stood in a pair of shorts, I would kill for a freezing cold skate park right now because I'm boiling in this facility. The point is, if we zoom in slightly, this was the end of the keynote. You might have noticed this wrinkle on the keynote primary stage. This is a reason why this is the only conference I've offered to help out. You should not give me power tools. So for everybody that was speaking at that event, I apologise for the dreadful setup of the stage. That's got nothing to do with this talk. I just want to take advantage of a couple of seconds to get that guilt out and finally unburden myself. So apologies to anybody that had to present with that absolute abomination. So with that out of the way, Deception Technology for me, it's not going to change the world. Everybody in security loves a silver bullet. We can put in this one new shiny toy, go home, everything's secure, the bad guys can't do anything. We know that doesn't work. So we always talk a good game of defense in depth, but often what does that mean? Have you seen this? Jumping ahead of myself. So this was the part that wasn't planned. I've noticed from talks both yesterday and today, lots of people have mentioned MITRE, and the attack framework itself has been mentioned quite a bit. It's been around for years. A bit that's less commonly known, I've given the game away slightly, there is a MITRE defend framework, which does exactly the same thing as the attack framework and maps defensive technologies that the blue team can use to try to defend against technologies. And for the purpose of this talk, if you zoom in slightly, there's a full column given over to sorts of deception technologies where we can put some of these techniques in place as part of that defense in depth model to help improve our overall defenses. I've mentioned that this is MITRE's framework. As a previous speaker's mentioned, this is American Deep State, if you don't want to get there. Other models are available. Does anybody recognize this table at all? Can't see a thing with these lights. No, possibly not. Rather obscure paper. This from a paper about 10 years ago, released by Lockheed Martin, was potentially responsible for starting what turned into complete marketing buzzword bingo of the term kill chain. Try not to get too put off by the marketing side. The paper itself is actually quite good. And the same way, give some time over to deception technologies alongside the rest of your defensive stack. So that's deception technologies. When I was starting my career too many years ago that I care to admit, when I'm stood on stage, especially if it's been recorded, I came across deception technologies for the first time. In the case of honeypots, please don't take a shot. And I thought this was the coolest thing in the world. For some reason, it just made sense to me. I thought this could really be a game changer. I thought this was brand new, cutting edge. We could really do something about it. and I had talked to a couple of people, and somebody said, if you like honeypots, what you need to do is read this book. Has anybody read Cuckoo's Egg before? Plenty of hands up. It's brilliant. I'm not entirely sure how I managed to miss it. For those of you that haven't read it, I honestly fully recommend it, but very short over story. Cliff, our hero of the story, was working on his university systems. Like a lot of us do in the day job, went off to investigate some weird activity on his systems. As part of that, he deployed some fake user accounts, some fake data that he thought his adversary, sort of threat hunting, took a hypothesis, put some data out there that he thought his adversary might be interested in, so he get a better idea of what they're up to. And in the end, so I'll try to be quick, found a foreign adversary that was trying to sell the data that was stolen to the KGB. Again, cutting edge, bleeding edge. If you've been watching the news, this might seem fairly familiar. This was back in 1986. The technology that I thought was cutting edge, this guy was doing it at a time I was still crawling around in diapers. So unfortunately, it wasn't that cutting edge. I said, I love this book, give it a read. I love everything Cliff's done. There's a few bits and pieces if you're interested to take a look. The one thing you might want to take some credit away from him, as part of this work, when he put these triggers in place, this was before a lot of network defensive technology was in place. One of his traps he had connected up to a pager, if anybody's old enough to remember those things, so that when his adversary was on the network, he would get a notification in real time. And the guy might have invented honeypot technologies, but it seems he's also invented the on-call pager, so try not to hate him too much, because I think we've all done that before. So I'll skip really quickly over that so I don't get him too much. So, what's our options for defensive technologies? The frameworks I've shown before, there was lots of different boxes. I'll try to add some value to some of those. Now, this is the point of the talk where I'm at serious risk of overrunning my time slot, because I could talk about this forever and keep coming up with more ideas. So I'll try to keep these brief. I'm going to try and start off with some of the less technical ones, the easiest ways to get involved with deceiving our adversaries, which ultimately what we're trying to do. I'd imagine everybody in this room is going to be aware that somewhere out there we're responsible for systems. There's bad people out there trying to do bad things. We want to stop them doing bad things. So we'll start off with an easy one, and I can't see a thing with these lights. Who can tell me what a robot's TXT file is? Exactly that, with the emphasis on where they can't go. Deception technologies, if you looked at a robot's TXT file, and if you were pen testing, you saw that. We've already seen some of the talks from yesterday of using some of this information to play with financial markets and make some nice profit. If I'm a pen tester seeing that, I might just want to go and see what the Q4 release are going to be that they don't want Google to know about. Defensive side, if I've got a monitor looking for any bad people looking for those directories, they're probably having a look around my robot's TXT file looking for things I don't want them to know about. That helps flesh out some of the activity they're doing and might point me to other bad things that they were doing that had all already slipped under the radar. Similarly, if your own system might be compromised, surely nobody would be staffed enough to leave an Excel spreadsheet full of domain admin passwords lying around on the desktop.
Oh yes, they were.
Mentioning no names. Similarly, you could populate that file with some usernames that are active on the system that don't actually get used. And again, you can look for activity on some of those. Gives you some indication of what people are doing around on your network. I said this is the point where I'm at serious risk of overloading, because I'm going to add in another example which wasn't on the slide deck, but it came to mind watching the previous chap's talk. That one of the discovery phases, really quickly, you've all just seen it, was abusing the ARP protocol to look for other systems on the network. One of the oldest honeypots that I'm aware of did something similar. Sat on the network, looks for ARPS requests. If a genuine system claimed that ARP address, what the tar pit does is it just lets it go. If there's not a system on the network claims that ARP address, it says, yep, over here, that's me, and then starts responding to the people looking for those systems really, really slowly. So absolutely every system on a network, if you do an Nmap scan, responds and says there's something there, starts going really slowly and slows your adversary down. It's not the end of the world. Any competent pen tester should probably see this quite quick, work out what's going on and work around it. But it's another hurdle I've got to get through. It's another opportunity for the blue team to identify something's going on and start looking further. So with that, I'll get back on script. Conversation for yesterday. Again, I do like a bit of audience participation. Can anybody tell me what this little bit of HTML is liable to provide? It is. It's a form. Specifically, it's an admin form. You can see we have a username, a password, and it's a fairly basic form primarily because I'm not a developer by any stretch, so I stole this from W3 Schools as an example. But if you edit it, you might see a little addition of a hidden field next to the form with an admin that equals false. Now, I know very few pen testers that are going to see this that aren't going to go, ooh, that looks interesting. What happens if that turns true? Perfect example from yesterday. I forget, I'm dreadful with names. I forget the chap who did the talk. Gave an example of authentication bypass, very, very similar to this. Changed a successive false to a successive true and bypassed the authentication. So most pen testers that see this, automated tooling like Zap or Burp Suite are going to look at that, give it a change, see what happens. Again, anything that came through to the form that had admin of anything other than false probably means someone's doing they shouldn't, because it's a hidden form and a human, a normal user, should never see that field, should never interact with it. So it gives us another trigger that we can see what's going on. Come on. Getting more interesting. This is where things take a bit more time to set up. Cowrie, and I'll get to Cowrie in a bit more detail, but it is essentially, you've just seen from the previous talk, set me up perfectly. As I keep said, SSH can be used for all manner of things. Any Linux system admin is going to know how to use it. Any competent pen tester or attacker is going to know how to abuse it. Cowrie, well, we'll get to that. It's a Cowrie honeypot for taking advantage of people interacting with it. And we all like serverless world, cloud, micro containers, micro workloads, all the serverless stuff. So I've got an example of a honey token for an AWS key pair, which you can use to look at attacks against the cloud rather than traditional things. So moving on. So what is Cowrie in detail? It's that SSH daemon of a Linux server. SSH should gives you command level access into the box, and Cowrie essentially fakes that system. So what can you do with that? It does an awful lot of things. One of the most basic ones, especially if you sit one of these out on the internet, I've got one running now. If you put SSH open to the world without a firewall, it's going to get attacked. For my purposes, it gets attacked very, very rapidly, very, very frequently, and gives me lots of things to get me distracted when I should be making tea for the kids and instead of playing with honeypots. Basic example, you can see what usernames and passwords are being used by real attacks in the world. You can see, come on, wrong button. You can see from file name, this was just last week. This was just 1 day's worth of data. It's running off the end of my screen. This isn't usernames and password combinations that I'm pulling out of things like the RockU database, or the attacking tools. This is things that's being used in the wild against my system, and I suspect all of your systems as well. So if you want to do a password check against the passwords you've got in your system, it probably makes sense to make sure that these combinations definitely aren't in use. From a researcher side, like myself, it's interesting to take some of the more interesting ones, like, for example, looking at the top 010 CTY gibberish. I'll be honest, when I get home, I'm going to be putting that into Google to see what default password that is for some system and to see why it's suddenly so interesting to my adversaries. And from a business perspective, if it then becomes a platform that's default for a particular application, particular network, I'm then going to see if that particular service, that particular device is on my network, and more importantly, if the admins have changed it from whatever the default password is. One of the things I like about Cowrie, originally Keepo before it's rebuilt, is if you guess the right password, it will give you a shell. Restricted, you can't do everything, but from a user's perspective, you get on. At which point we can then start seeing what our adversaries are doing. When I started doing this far too long ago, as I've said, the one thing I found really interesting is that human attackers on a system really can't type. They make more typos than me when there's somebody watching me, which is impressive. But you also see things like this. You can see the dark grey of sort of this block here. This is lots of Linux bash commands chained together, all in one go. Really good indication that the attacker in this instance was a bot. There's not a human at a keyboard. Nobody's sitting typing that out by hand all the way. There's a bit of automation, and to a limited extent, the Cowrie SSH process will let it do what it wants. In this case, it's gone away. This attacker's gone, okay, I want to get some more attack. Previous talk on fileless malware, using that dropper to make the second payload. In this case, Cowrie will let that connection go. It will take the file, and it'll do absolutely everything with it, with the exception of executing it. But then I've got a copy of that fileless payload. And in this case, this was the fileless payload which went off to get more attacks. And very, very brief analysis. I'm not going to go through any of the reverse engineering for any of this. I spent about 30 seconds on my sofa last night to make sure I knew what this was. It looks like this is a copy of the Mirai botnet that's still bouncing around trying to attack things. And if you want to play with all that and carry, I get fascinated. Every time I install a system, I find they've added a new feature. By default, it fakes SSH. It can do FTP, SMTP, all manner of number services as well. But it provides a system on your network which you want your adversaries to engage with. One, it distracts them, but anything interacting with this system you want to take a look at because it's probably someone doing something nefarious. And from my side, I'm a strange geek. It's fun. I spend far too much time watching bad guys attack systems that I don't care about. So that's the SSH one. I said very briefly, I've got some keyless honeypot. I'm going to do this really quick because if anybody that was at DEF CON 44191 a few months ago, you've already got a full 30 minutes of me explaining this. So really quickly what it is, key pair, AWS terminology. If you've not used AWS, it's essentially username and password. You generate one, you leak it somewhere on the internet, see if anybody wants to abuse it. We're not entirely crazy. You give it a policy that gives it no permission, so it can't actually do anything. All it does is it means that when someone tries to talk to AWS's platform with this key, AWS associates that key back to me, so I get the visibility of what's going on instead of just their SOC. Leave out the guts, using various services, monitors all the logs, and ultimately, we'll try not to give Cliff too much grief at this point, it fires off a message to the pager to tell us that somebody's abusing that key. As you can see, in this instance, there's a fair few moving parts. It took me, the first time around I was working this out by hand, it was a good few hours, poking boxes randomly, making sure I got it in place, and it took a bit of time to build. But the end results are quite good. So hopefully, with that very brief overview of some of the options that you can get in deception technology, I'm hoping I've generated, one, a bit of interest, and potentially a few ideas for where you could take some of this mindset to help defend some of your networks to get some better visibility. To me, I think a lot of this is a no-brainer. I hope everybody else does as well. I seem to get excited people when I start talking about this that do quite like the idea. So what's stopping us? One, it's time. Old World, the first carry honeypot I built. It took me several days, build a new Linux system. Yeah, my boss isn't going to be too happy if I'm playing with that if it's not on a Jira sprint. So there's some time involved. There is some expense. You're running a system. Old World, if it was old-fashioned tin, these things get expensive. And fundamentally, we've got higher priorities. You look at that big table of all the defensive controls we should be putting in place, including that you've got patching, antivirus, firewalls, all the system hardening stuff that we should be doing. And as much as I love this technology, in all honesty, if you've not done any of that, if your antivirus isn't up to date, if your patches are missing, although apparently 20% patching is good from previous talk, which was a stat that somewhat scared me. But if you're missing the basics, deception technology, you're probably not quite at that maturity yet. And that's one of the problems we'll get. It's that return on investment, what's going on. And biggest problem I've seen, management buy-in. I'm speaking at this technical security conference here trying to explain what this technology is. Hopefully I've not lost anybody yet. But equally, it's not a technology everyone comes across. This audience isn't too bad. You go to management, you go to the C-suite, and you tell them that you want to pay money to deploy a system that you purposely want the bad guys to attack, hack, and crack. They're going to look at you like you've got three heads. And it's not the easiest of sales pitches, especially if you tell them that you want to take time out from doing other things and spend their money to do it. It's an interesting sales pitch. And the ROI is just not there. And one of the biggest ones I've seen, whilst as an industry, we always talk about defense in depth. Defense in depth is good. There's no silver bullets. Everything can fail. We need extra. I've never once come across a regulatory or compliance framework that says, hey, you need a honeypot. You need some deception. Antivirus, patching, all the stuff that everybody does do. The auditors are going to be really hot to go, yep, you need to do this. I've never once had an auditor that's come to me, where's your honeypot? Now, I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek. I'm sure if there's any ISO 27001 people in the audience, my own compliance guys say the same thing. Well, it's absolutely in the framework. You have it as a compensating control, and that's fine. But you've got to define that as a control. It's not something that's mandated, which means management have to let you do it. So that's a lot of things that are stopping us. But I don't want to be too negative because I like playing with fun toys. I hope everybody else does as well. So what if we can change all of that? And disclaimer, yeah, I'm not going to do all that. Management buy-in for this, doesn't matter what we do technically, is going to be more interesting. And I'm probably not changing the compliance guys' view of the world either. But one of the bits I found to deal with, especially the concept, the blockers of not having enough time to do some of this. We've all got busy day jobs, and the expense of running these things, get them up and running, get some value out and get them down. I don't know why my slide to that is, which you might have got to guess, is leveraging infrastructure as code. It's nothing new. The ops guys have been doing this for many years. Lots of you possibly doing this as well. But equally, especially from security people, I've seen a lot of security people that they know their operations team use infrastructure as code, but there's some security people don't actually know how to use it for security tooling. So hopefully I'll try to explain a bit of that. So really high level, what is infrastructure as code? It kind of names itself. It is code that defines your infrastructure. And the key advantage is it's repeatable. From the carry perspective, I said the first one I built took me 3 days playing with a Linux box to get it up and running, getting all the patches in place, getting all the requirements in place, recompiling. It was a mess. But eventually, with going down the infrastructure as code route, once you do that work once, the deployment of that thing becomes repeatable. And at the click of a button, as we'll show a bit later on, you can do that thing again and again and again. Which makes it automatable. And as much as I like playing with shiny toys, I am also inherently lazy. I don't like doing the same thing over and over. That's Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill. That's not what I want to do. I want to do one thing once and then play with the goodies. And now that I've got this in place, and I can share the links later, for my carry honeypots, if I want a new one, I tell Terraform to go and give me one, and it just does it. I love infrastructure as code. I love automation. Ultimately, I love sitting in a hammock reading a book instead of building the same system I've spoiled 3 times. The other advantage of it is because it's repeatable, it's the same thing. It should be less error prone. Once you get it right once, you've got no chance of making a mistake. The example I showed earlier with the address key, so the first time I did it by hand, made a few changes. It was quite a manual process. Simple enough process, but lots of manual steps. Plenty of places, especially when you're distracted. Phone call, odd tweet, I need some coffee, the dog wants letting out. Forget where you are, miss a bit. Just let the automation take care of it and do it all in one go. As I say, one of the blockers, reduce costs. One of the things, especially from my side, as an individual researcher for myself, a lot of the stuff I do, especially in the honeypot world that's not tied directly with work, is it's all attached to my credit card. I'm sure everyone's aware of various horror stories. There's one, I believe, sitting in this room. Yep, there he is, of potential really, really nasty AWS bills. I don't want to call you out, but if you stick your hand up, that's absolutely fine. These things terrify me. Running something in one of the clouds, forgetting to turn it off, and at the end of the month getting a horrendous bill because I forgot. That's the kind of thing that keeps me up at night. That's the sort of thing I really don't want to have to explain to the missus, that I can't pay the childcare for the kids because I forgot to turn the server off. Infrastructure as code all goes away. You finish your project, you finish your tinkering at the end of the night, you run that destroy command, everything that's been deployed via infrastructure as code gets destroyed via the same system. It tracks it all for you. My memory is atrocious. I don't have to remember that. I just need to remember to kill the project I was working on. Helps keep my credit card bills down. And if you're doing it as an employer, it helps you keep your costs down as well. As a brief show of hands, not necessarily in infrastructure as code, but in your network, how many people at some point in their career have had a random box that's sat in the data center that nobody quite knows what it does, nobody remembers who puts it there, but nobody's quite got the steel balls to turn it off because nobody quite knows what it does. I've got at least a couple of hands. I've got a lot of very nervous faces that aren't willing to put the hands up. But same sort of thing. You build everything as infrastructure code. At the very least, you've got that documentation history of what's there. It means that you can turn it off if you need to. It means that if you've got the infrastructure as code, if it turns out you really shouldn't turn it off, you can deploy it back. But it also keeps a record of exactly what that configuration was. I used the example of the carry installation for myself. It took me 3 days to get that working. By the time I got it working, I tried that many different things to get it working. I had no idea what I'd done to get it working. And it was almost as long to do it the second time round. So keep everything documented, makes life easy. Infrastructure as code. There are almost as many options for infrastructure code as there are for languages for writing any piece of software. And for any devs in the room, there's lots of arguments, lots of options, causes lots of arguments. Everyone's got their favorite. If you don't come across it, there's things like Ansible's one option, Pulumi, Chef. There's native tools if you want to stick with a particular platform like AWS's CloudFormation. The Cloud Development Toolkit is actually one of my personal favorites at the minute. I love the concept of it just because it lives inside of other programming languages. You don't need to learn another syntax for the infrastructure as code. In my case, I can now write infrastructure as code as Python. You might prefer TypeScript, and it leaves it that close to you without learning something else. For my infrastructure as code, I use Terraform. I'll debate the pros and cons separately as to which one's better than others. I'll be perfectly honest, I use Terraform because when I started looking at infrastructure as code, that's what my operational team were using. That's the people I could go tap on the shoulder to get some help with when it all went horribly wrong. So I'd love to tell you there's a wonderful technical reason for that. It was just where I get the most help to get it up and running. But for the purposes of this, it serves as an example. Infrastructure code, this is some Terraform. I feel that this is part of the deployment of that AWS key. In this case, it's creating the policy that says go away. If anyone's looked at this, if you don't know Terraform, hopefully it's fairly readable. If you've got any experience of any sort of object-oriented type language, it looks a bit like a class. We define a thing, in this case it's a user policy, and we give it a name. We set some variables. One of the powerful bits of is, when you looked at that, there was lots of moving parts for setting up something, even just something as simple as a user key. Lots of different components interacting. You can all be self-referencing, so if you don't know what a particular thing is going to be at the time, give a reference in the code, let Terraform work it all out, and it just does it for you. For the purpose of time, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but that's an example of what it looks like. And to us, if I can work this out fairly quickly, you don't have to be too much of a genius to work this out, so go and have a play. Especially when the one big bit I will say for Terraform is HashiCorp have done an absolutely fantastic job with the documentation and manual, and I never thought I'd stand on a stage and say some documentation was good. I hate documentation. Generally, I hate reading it. I'd most definitely hate writing it, and I'd most definitely hate watching documentation as a video. The people that do that can get yeeted in the sun. But Terraform's documentation is brilliant. Usually I look for the thing that's erroring. Quick look in there, scroll up and down a few lines, get the answer, get it fixed. That's one of the few places where, without being too insulting, I will just say RTFM. So if you're playing with that, and it's relatively straightforward. There's a core workflow which, if you use other infrastructure as code platforms as well, it's fairly similar, but I'll stick with the Terraform one for the example. First thing you do, initialize your directory. If you play with source repositories, your gits, your subversions, things like that, very similar. Just sets it up, say, yep, this directory, I'm going to deploy some Terraform to it. Then we write the code. That might be writing something like you've just seen, or just cloning somebody else's code and reusing what they've got. The bit that for me makes infrastructure as code, because I'm a tinkerer, I play with new things, I don't always know what I'm doing when I'm started. It's got the concept of a plan. You can write some code, you can run a plan. It'll look at your code, it looks at where you're trying to deploy. In this example, I'm using AWS, but it can talk to other cloud providers are available, GCP, Azure, DigitalOcean, wherever your kit is. If you're on-prem, you can get providers for VMware, for example, or Docker repositories if you're containerless. So you can work with whatever you've got, and it will map the thing you've just defined as code with the work environment, and it will give you an idea of, okay, I'm looking at this to make the environment look like what it is you've described. I think, I being the Terraform, the infrastructure as code, I think this is what I'm going to do, and it'll tell you what it's going to build, what it's going to create, what it's going to look like. And it does all of that without actually making any changes, so you can verify that it's doing what you want to do without touching anything. When I'm playing in my own environment, that's not the biggest end of the world. If you're playing in a corporate environment, knowing what it's going to do before you go and break production is slightly important, and I find that rather useful. Once you're happy, you apply it, and it goes off and does all the hard work for you. In this deployment example, it took a few seconds as opposed to several hours of manually pushing the buttons, even when we knew exactly what we wanted to do, thus saving us time. And as I've already alluded to, when you're all done, hit the destroy button, everything goes away, no more big credit card bills for Andrew, everybody's happy. There's a couple of other steps you might have guessed from the gap. There's automatic formatting in there, which is just nice, makes my code look like everybody else's code, makes it look like I'm somewhat competent, because it looks like a decent developer wrote it. And there's a validation step in there that checks that the syntax right, silly typos, things before you get. It's not 100% foolproof. It's quite possible to write some infrastructure as code that passes validation, passes the formatting. The plan says, yep, this is what I'm going to do. and you still end up with a problem once it starts making those API calls, but believe that's a problem for later, not for this use case. If you're interested in some of this, you can get ridiculously complex. I've purposely tried to keep the examples I'm using quite straightforward. The carried installation is just using Terraform as code to deploy one box to get exactly what I want. The AWS example is just deploying one AWS key to watch those. But the world is your oyster. Terraform as code, operations teams use this to deploy all manner of services all over the world, and you can get quite complex. And for our purposes, some of this is quite easy. If you hopefully have generated some enthusiasm that you want to go and play with this yourself, which is great, go off, write complex use cases, brilliant. If you just want to see what it can do and just use the power of deployment via infrastructure as code without having to write any of it yourself, there's some good projects. Talk yesterday, which I loved, talking about war gaming and using real world examples to get hands-on training across teams, new starters, different things. Perfect example. There was a question came out at the end of, how do I do it? How do I get the labs? Do I need to pay money to hack the box, for example? Not necessarily. There's a great project which I quite like called the Cyber Range, which is a Terraform project which will deploy all of these things, which you can't quite see. These are all target systems, lots of different Windows boxes, a couple of the standard box things like Metasploitable if you've come across that platform. Loads of attacking systems, so there's a Kali box you can play with, again, all automated, some logging stuff if you want to practice defending, and it will actually deploy a load of honeypots to let you play with as well. And if you get the project in, literally one command, it just runs. And if you want to play with it, it's completely open source. Go to Git, get it running, with a couple of commands that you've got to sign up first to get access to some of these images, but we'll leave that aside. But once you get that in place, you can run one command which will deploy all that for you. When you're done with your testing, you can destroy it all. It all goes away. One word of warning, even if you do just run it and destroy it inside a couple of hours, that still has an impact on your credit card because it's deploying all that much. You can get targeted and just deploy one or two systems at a time rather than everything. But it gives you an idea of some of the more complex use cases that you can get out of infrastructure as code. So with that, I'll try to be quick. Hopefully the point of this talk, I said I'm not dropping any elite knowledge. I'm trying to introduce some of the areas that I find fascinating, that I'm trying to spend some more time with, and hopefully I'll manage to encourage everybody else to try and do the same thing. So if you would like to know more, I've already alluded to, if you do want to play with infrastructure code, honestly, if you've not used it before, go speak to your operations team, find out what they use. They can help you in exchange for making a cup of tea, more than likely. That's much better than picking a minor choice. If not, Terraform's not bad. I've said the documentation is really useful. It's not a bad place to start. Even their learning site, which I'm normally quite critical of, is also really good. If the honeypots and deception technology is more your thing, definitely go and speak to the HoneyNet project. They've got some great resources on there, some great platforms themselves, and just ultimately it's a team of great people. If you want to know more, speak to those team there. If reading's your thing, honeypots, I both love and hate this book that Chris put together. I love it because it's brilliant, it gives me loads of information. It's also, if I was ever going to write a book, this was the book that I would have written with everything I read, but nowhere near as good as Chris did. So if you're interested, go and read it. If nothing else, Chris is a thoroughly nice guy. Go help his sales numbers. I'm sure he'll appreciate it. Another book, primarily from John Strand, if you know Black Hills Information, other security consultants are out there, but this book's brilliant. Covers off honeypot technologies as well as the tooling which John's created over the years to do this sorts of thing. Things like artillery reader, some really good things. Word of note has been discussed in a few talks, the concept of offensive technologies, hacking back. The book goes into that, which makes it absolutely fascinating. I am not a lawyer. If you decide to hack back against Iran, don't come looking for me to help. But the book itself is fascinating, and I've already mentioned the Cuckoo's Egg. Definitely give that a read. If reading's not your thing, and tying the two together, if you look at Chris's Cuckoo's Egg Decompiled course, it's freely available. It's absolutely brilliant. Essentially, Chris uses the storyline of the Cuckoo's Egg to explain and introduce technology where you could move the events that happened in the 1980s into modern day technology that you can use today to take those principles, take those ideas, and implement them in modern technology. I definitely recommend that giving a go. And on the off chance you've still got any interest in learning what the idiot on stage is talking about, all the projects I've discussed live on my GitHub. You can go find it on Infosanity or find me on Twitter under the same username, and you can get everything from there. So I do have one call to action. If by any chance I've done my job and you think this might be of interest, please go away and try to play things. But the beauty of infrastructure as code is once you get something running via that platform, it's just a code template. From there, I say for me, I can redeploy my things all the time. It also means that if you were to write something and give that code to somebody else, they can do the same thing. If we share all of these deployment templates together, it means that we as an industry have access to a huge range of different tooling that we can deploy without those time constraints, without necessarily those expense complaints, and increase the defenses collectively of all of us without needing to do everything of ourselves. Good old standard of standing on the shoulders of giants. If you create it and you share it, I can guarantee from experience, doesn't matter how bespoke, unique something you've released is, somebody on the internet will be trying to solve the same challenge, and they'll come and thank you because you've just saved them 2 days worth of development. So if you can, if it's not proprietary technology and you can share from your employer, please do. I love playing with everybody else's code. I say I'm lazy. I'd much rather be sitting in a hammock if I can deploy your code rather than spending a couple of days rewriting the thing you've already worked out. That makes everybody's life easier all around. So with that, I shall pause. Are there any questions?
Got you guys well trained. I don't even have to tell you to applaud anymore. This is awesome. Hello, dear. How are you? Not too bad.
A little bit grossed out from earlier.
Yeah.
So I get that you're talking about like infrastructure as code in terms of honeypots, but honeypots in general make me nervous, and I'll tell you why.
Yep.
So I've got 2 examples from the past, say, 10 years, which I think that's too many, of when this has been done really badly. So I didn't work at this company myself, but this really excitable guy in a blue team got authority. I can't imagine why, but he got authority to stand up this server, and like we can learn loads from it. It's going to be amazing. Blah, blah, fucking blah. He puts it on the internet. It works. They get loads of attacks, but he didn't properly segregate it because he didn't have the support. So the company actually got infected with various different threat actors. Nothing serious, no APTs.
Yep.
They weren't a massive target, but that person, like yourself, really excitable, like, advocated for it.
Yep.
But he got authority to do it. And so anyway, there's that. And then an experience I had at a company I was at, they had a honeypot database that had fake information in it. Now, okay, great. A threat actor got it, or a group got it, and the group didn't know that it was fake information, which is great, but neither did the press. So when journalists got hold of it, they were like, oh, this is so-and-so's data, and they were like, oh no, it's fake, and they were like, we don't care, it's going in the fucking newspaper, mate. So it just makes me incredibly nervous. So how can we get senior leaders on board with stories like that floating around?
Yeah, brilliant points all around. I think you just perfectly explained why it's ridiculously difficult to get management buy-in for this sort of thing. Yeah. Your first example, I'm going to be slightly slopey shouldered and suggest that's a pebcac problem rather than a honeypot problem. Where previous talk already said, sorry, no acronyms, pebcac problem exists between keyboard and chair. That's probably not how you deploy one of these things, but there's some very important points to that. I'm speaking, you'll notice my employer wasn't mentioning any of this. The stuff I've described here, this is stuff I do as a personal capacity. All of the honeypots that I expose to the internet for these sorts of attacks, I do as me, completely unrelated to an employer. If I was doing this from an employer's side, I absolutely would not put a honeypot live on the internet. I'd treat it as any other resource, and that gets firewalled away. It doesn't get a public IP address left internally, which makes it really boring because there's hopefully no attackers on the inside of your network and nothing happens from the honeypot. From a return on investment side, it also makes the value to noise ratio on that honeypot immensely valuable, because if there's something on the inside of your network that is poking that honeypot, you probably want to know about it pretty damn quick. One of which it might be a compromise, and as just been shown with looking around, looking for all those systems in the previous talk of just to see what was on the network, it's going to pull up the honeypot as well. From my experience, and obviously deploying honeypots in professional settings, I've not got really any interesting war stories. I don't have any wonderful Mirai scripts from doing those scenarios. I do have example of some new really enthusiastic members of staff that have come in and within 24 hours started abusing their network access just to poke around and see what they can get. It's quite, from a blue team perspective, it's really handy.
Scott came and worked for you as well. All right, okay.
It's good to know who these people are really quickly. Not necessarily give them a slap on the wrist, but just, we're watching, and yes, we are most definitely going to pay a lot of attention to you. So there is some value there. In terms of, the press release, that doesn't surprise me. The journalist that's got the story isn't going to care whether the data is public or not. I wouldn't be doing that from the corporate side, but from a individual researcher side, I love that kind of thing.
There was a spin angle there to turn around and say, no, we caught that guy trying to break into our network. That's why he's got dummy data. But, that's it. It's like, hey, look, it worked.
From a reputational perspective, though, it's quite challenging, isn't it, to say, yes, it is our data, but no, it's fake. Honest.
Yeah.
Well, but that's the spin. The spin is yes, we caught them because they fell into our trap. If somebody isn't able to stand up and say that, then it's going to be awful.
Yeah.
But and very few companies need to put a box out on the internet to see what's getting hit. Normally, that's security companies doing research.
Yeah, they didn't need to. It was kind of an excitable person that got authority
and
to do it because the senior leaders didn't understand the consequences of it.
And equally, as a perfect example, if you do want to play with any of this without all the risks, you've just done a perfect job of explaining what they are. Keynote from yesterday, I think it was Raj from Rapid7 was talking about the projects which he said he's about to put live. I may or may not have seen some of that data. I had access before it goes completely public. A lot of the data that I'm talking about, if you can get big name professional companies just giving you all that data, you can do it that way. Projects like that. It's already been mentioned, things like Shodan Census. A lot of the time they'll have information that they glean. Threat intelligence companies, a lot of the time they throw this out there, shove it in a report, charge you $100,000 for. So there's ways of getting the data without running the systems yourself. I'm a technical geek. I like playing with toys myself. I'll probably get my fingers burnt at some point, but there's a reason why I do this as me. Absolutely nothing to do with any of the employees I've done before, because I like getting paid at the end of the day, and I don't want to explain why the CISO is in front of BBC News.
Next question.
Question and a comment. Firstly, last time I played with honeypots was about 4 or 5 years ago, and at the time, Nmap was very good about fingerprinting the services as honeypots. Has that changed? Do the honeypots now better emulate the original service?
Yeah, there's still that. There's always a bit of a sort of race. There's the usual race that we have as an industry where we're chasing between attackers and defenders. It's always changing. Exactly the same thing. To some extent, I'm not too bothered if my honeypot, for the ones I deploy, get fingerprinted that much, because that's usually a competent human behind the keyboard that sees it. Most of the attacks I see are either automated bots which aren't looking for these things, or very incompetent script kiddies. So it's not that much of an issue. If I was wanting to, for instance, Cowrie, I get quite lazy. As I said, I like my hammock. By default, it'll spin up a system, default file system that comes as part of the project. You can tell very quickly it is a Cowrie system. But equally, if you spend a bit of time, there's ways of building a fresh file system, completely unique, takes away all of those indicators to make it harder to fingerprint. So it depends how much effort you want to put in, depending on what you want to get out of it, who your adversaries are. If it's general research, it's good enough. If you're trying to trick insert nation state here, I'll try not to name names, then you're going to have to put a bit more effort into it and take a bit more risk as you go. Ultimately, if you're deploying a honeypot, things like even the medium to high interaction honeypots like Cowrie, which have some controls, if you want to run a honeypot that's completely undetectable, you need to run a completely native system, take all the risk with it whatsoever, take all the training wheels off. And I've been doing this for years now. I'm not willing to go down and take that level of risk myself, but it depends what you're trying to get out of the engagement, really.
Right, thanks. And just the comment, I'm also a massive fan of the cuckoo's egg. I have literally lost count of the number of copies I've bought of that in the last 25 years and given away as Christmas presents to colleagues. If you really can't bring yourself to read the book, if you look on YouTube, PBS made the movie of the book in 1989 with Cliff Stoll himself starring in it.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting video.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. if for nothing else, if you jump to, I'm slightly concerned, I think I actually know the time reference in this. If you jump to about minute 41, there's a brilliant scene where the film Chris explaining what he's doing to his then girlfriend as to what's going on. This is the reference around sort of inventing the page. If this happens, I need to run away. And the look of sheer confusion from the non-technical spouse, I've seen 100 times before trying to explain what I do to my missus. It's worth it just for that section in my mind.
Okay, one last question if anyone's got one.
One's slightly silly, but can you enumerate honeypot 10 times just for whoever's on the live feed doing the drinking?
Honeypot, 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 honeypot. That's probably enough if you can manage to tolerate your alcohol like I can these days. Add that to everything else, you're probably in a comatose. So, yeah, please do not turn that into a drinking game, otherwise people will end up in hospital.
I think you underestimate the liver of some of the people that attend this.
That is quite possibly, if we go for where the weird things go, that is possibly the weirdest way I've ever finished a presentation, so I think that's probably a good time to stop.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.